going to do next?
Tracks, which is a fictional recreation of the true story of Robin Davidson's epic trek across the Australian outback from Alice Springs to the west coast, which is 1,700 miles. This is a fairly well-known story. She was 25 when she arrived in Alice Springs in 1975-27 when she set off, armed with 4 camels, 1 dog called Diggity, and a sponsorship deal with National Geographic. Now, she wanted to do the walk completely on her own, but part of the sponsorship deal was that National Geographic said, well, we need to have photographs. So there was a photographer, Rick Smolin, who would intercept her at regular intervals along the route to take photographs and to catch up and document the whole thing for National Geographic. There were also certain parts of the journey in which, in order to pursue the straightest line, she needed with her an elder, because she wasn't, as a woman, she wasn't allowed to be travelling through that land alone. But for most of the journey, the central essence of what she's doing is she's out in the wilderness, kind of in the middle of nowhere. You remember that thing that Baz Luhrmann once said? He said, the thing about Australia, you have to remember, as Australia has more of nothing than anywhere else. And certainly watching Tracks, you do get that sense of an enormous expanse of not nothing, but emptiness, isolation, and loneliness. Central character played by Mia Wasikowska. Let's call the whole thing off.
Yes,
Here she is from early on in the film.
I'd always been drawn to the purity of the desert. Its hot wind and wide open spaces.
Alone?
Yeah, well, I'll need to train some camels to carry my gear, and then there's Diggity, of course.
You go right ahead, love. Go right ahead.
But mainly I was bored of life in the city, with its repetitions, my half-finished, half-hearted attempts at jobs and various studies. And I was sick of carrying around the self-indulgent negativity that was so much the malaise of my generation, my sex and my class. The decision to act was in itself the beginning of the journey. I believe when you've been stuck too long in one spot, it's best to throw a grenade where you're standing and jump. And pray.
So that gives you a sense of the sort of philosophy behind it. And during the course of the journey, she's sort of wrestling with her own personal demons. And there is, as there necessarily is when you sort of turn something into a slightly fictionalised narrative, there is a perhaps slightly too neat attempt to tie up the desire to be alone with unreconciled issues in the past. Some of that works, not all of it does. But the film, firstly, it's, on a scenic level, it is a really engrossing watch. You do get the sense of the journey. You do feel that you're actually, there with the central characters. Mia Wasikowska is really, really good. Adam Driver is terrific as Rick Smolin, who's the photographer who turns up and is obviously completely besotted with Robin, but she doesn't really want anything to do with him, but every now and then she kind of requires TLC from him. There's a terrific performance by Ronnie Mintuma as Mr. Eddie, who is the elder who sees her through a large section of the journey through sacred lands. The other thing is the camels themselves are fantastically expressive. I know this sounds like a daft thing to say, but camels are almost sort of comedically drawn to be, for anthropomorphic projection. I mean, they are really, unbelievably expressive faces in this extraordinary range.
What kind of expressions can they put?
Well, I can't do it because I'm not a camel.
Describe the faces.
They can look haughty. They can look sad. They can look angry. They can look affectionate. They really can. And you have all of that, and then you also have Diggity the dog, who is, up there with
Hot Diggity,
with exactly, because he's in the desert. Very good. Boy, I wish I'd thought of that first. Even the sort of the greatest canine agnostic cannot fail to be moved by that. And the whole point is that she's having this relationship with these with animals with whom she seems to communicate better than the people around her. There's one wonderful sequence when she turns up out of having walked across the desert, literally her with her camels, and she turns up in this very, very remote place where there's just a woman standing on the porch of her house, and she turns up like literally out of nowhere, like Lawrence of Arabia, out of the desert. And there's a long pause, and the woman says, "You coming in for tea then?" And they just get on with it.
Where's she from?
Yes, that's very kind. She's from Greenwich. And so you do get a very fine sense of the journey and of the loneliness. And I mean, on perhaps the downside, it's not a film which is packed with event. I mean, considering that the journey itself was actually, it is, potentially life-threatening. She's told at the very beginning she's given a gun by somebody who says, look, if a bull camel comes running towards you, don't think twice, just shoot it. And as you said before, it's that thing about, if somebody introduces a gun in the first act of the film, you know that it's going to have to be used at some point. But what's actually quite impressive is that the film progresses at a walking pace. I mean, she is walking across this extraordinary expanse of desert. And the film progresses at that pace. And what it doesn't feel the need to do, which many of these films would do, is to crank everything up, to create some really extraordinary event that has to be the same. Actually, then when you read it says, oh well, that didn't happen, the plane crash didn't happen, this didn't happen. The film is willing to take the story of somebody who is independently minded and also to some extent troubled and naturally nomadic enough to want to do this as a sort of as a life-changing exercise. And I think that the film is to be admired for that. I think some people might look at it and go, well, she walks and she has the camel and little things happen along the way, but it's not a great big instant film. No, but that's one of its strengths. It's not meant to be. You also completely believe in Mia Wasikowska as the central character. Quite often, if you see somebody sort of play, if somebody has actually in real life gone through some extraordinary physical ordeal. I mean, 1,700 miles in the best conditions is a staggering amount of walking. But blazing sun and parched, the water supplies sometimes have to be left for. You do believe, as you see in Mia Wasikowska's character play out of that she has been on that journey. But most importantly, the film ends up celebrating the reason that she does it. There was a lot of discussion when the story became a best-selling book that perhaps the reason that it chimed so much was because it was about somebody deciding to do this, a woman deciding to make this rather than somebody being forced by circumstances. I think she plays that very well. I think the film is aware of that. And as I said, a walking pace film, but a very good walk.